I wonder if we're live now. It looks like we're live.
Looks like we are, yeah.
I believe it is up and running, so yay.
Oh, awesome. Well, we'll give one more minute for people to jump on tonight. We're glad that y'all are joining us. I just noticed it seems so dark outside. The days are already starting to get so short.
It does seem dark, doesn't it?
It does. Like, I feel like it's way later than what it really is at this moment.
Reminds me of the Wednesdays we used to have the 7 a.m. Eucharist. If you had that, you left home when it was dark and you got home when it was dark.
Yeah.
Yes, you did. And you went home the night before when it was dark too.
Yeah.
Because you would usually have Tuesday and Wednesday.
I missed
Yeah, I can't see the church. That's when it's dark.
You're in the office tonight.
Yeah.
You're there late tonight.
Well, it's the best place for reception.
Oh.
Gotcha.
The internet's stable.
Fair enough. Some days in the office, it seems like lately there's some days staff are having problems with reception. Maybe it's just too many people on or something.
Liturgy yesterday was I think everyone was on a Zoom yesterday around 10:30 or 11 o'clock, and it was kind of coming in and out.
Yeah. Part of our plan in the new year is to boost that capacity.
Right.
Well,
I think.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say we're at 7:31. I think we've given about a minute for people to jump on. So welcome everyone to our Clergy Klatch on this evening. I am Kelly Wilson. I'm one of the associate priests at Christ Church in Greenville, South Carolina. I'm here with our rector, Harrison McLeod, and with our other associate priest, Charles Jenkins. We've been doing Clergy Klatch, wow, I think since March some point. And I think Harrison somewhat keeps track of the week, so he can tell us where we're at in terms of numbers. Are we still in the 30 somewhere, Harrison?
It's around 30 right now, yeah. About 30.
It's around 30. But for the next few weeks, we are going to do a special series during Clergy Klatch called the Faithful Living Series. And part of the reason that we decided to do this series is for most churches at this time, you're going through stewardship season. It seems like a lot of people are talking to you about money, but there's so many gifts we're given by God. And I think we often wonder how we can be faithful with the many gifts we've been given. So like tonight, we're going to be talking about time because we all have been given that gift of time. And so we're going to talk about how do we be faithful with our time. Before we do that, though, I'm going to let you open us up in prayer tonight, if you will.
Oh, good. Well, since we're embarking on the Faithful Living series and tonight's about time, I'm going to use prayer number 57 on page 832 of the Book of Common Prayer. It's for guidance. Direct us, O Lord, in all our doings with thy most gracious favor, and further us with thy continual help, that in all our works begun, continued, and ended in thee, we may glorify thy holy name, and finally, by thy mercy, obtain everlasting life through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. I appreciate that. So to discuss being faithful with our time tonight, we're going to actually use some verses that are probably familiar to almost all of our listeners. These verses are actually from Ecclesiastes, and the center is what you will notice. We're starting with verse 224, and we're going through 313. Starting a little bit before the verses you'll recognize, just to give you some context. We talk a lot on here how context is important. So this is what it says. A person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. This too, I see, is from the hand of God. For without him, who can eat or find enjoyment? To the person who pleases him, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and happiness. But to the sinner, he gives the task of gathering and storing up wealth to hand it over to the one who pleases God. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. What do workers gain from their toil? I have seen the burden God has laid on the human race. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live, that each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toil. This is the gift of God. So to put this a little bit in context, this is from the wisdom literature of the Old Testament. One of the things I love about wisdom literature, and really what I love about our scriptures, is sometimes our scriptures cause our own theology into question. And one of the things that a lot of the wisdom writers call into question is the idea if you follow the law perfectly, you will be blessed. And if you fail to follow the law perfectly, that there will be punishments. So often the wisdom writers notice that that formula doesn't really work. And I think that's what this author in Ecclesiastes is saying, is that that formula has not worked and that he's having a hard time finding a formula in some regards. What is the point of all of it, I think, is what he's asking. And I think what he points out is that really our joys in life, they seem to be transient. And sometimes life just feels empty. And why does that happen? And I think maybe some of us can even resonate with that feeling these days. Our days are beginning to feel a little bit redundant and the same as we're locked down and not seeing people. So they don't feel as full. It's not as full of the loved ones and the social activities with which we used to fill our lives. I also think that Ecclesiastes is encouraging us to make the best of our life while we're alive, enjoying the present and not probing too much in the future. So it's kind of being able to stay in this time without focusing about too much about what's to come or what we're going to do in the future. I also find that as an interesting connection, today's day and time, because we don't know how long we're going to be in this state. And I think a lot of us would like an answer about the future. And because there is no answer, we really have no choice but to stay in this time. So I find that as an interesting connection in here. I also think that one of the things that this writer is trying to tell us is while we cannot understand why life unfolds the way it does and why there certains to be certain seasons and times of our life, the reality is that God knows what the big drama is. God can see the whole purpose. God can see what's unfolding. And the problem is we just get a little glimpse. And because we don't understand it all, we kind of lose our focus and we lose our patience with living into the time that we are currently in. I'm just wondering, for our listeners out there, can you identify with these feelings? And Charles and Harrison, can you identify with what the sage is saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think that from a very early age, I think that we are sort of taught to make plans, to anticipate, to look to the future, to build for the future, to prepare for the future. And I think one of the things that, I mean, one of the many things that I think the writer of Ecclesiastes is trying to call us to is, don't neglect the present for the future. One of the best ways to make faithful use of time is to be present in the present, and not sort of always waiting for the next thing. I mean, anticipation's wonderful, and you know, I would not say we shouldn't prepare, but I think if we're so focused on what comes next that we're absent to what's happening right now, I think that harms relationships. I think that does so much damage, not just to us, but to others. And so I think, at least in part, that's what this is calling us to, is, you know, just be present and enjoy the moment, and be attentive to what's going on in the here and now.
Yeah, I think piggybacking on that is that, you know, it's this sort of outlines the rhythms of life with sort of the determination of events. And for me, this verse is always put into perspective that really, and Kelly, you were sort of, you know, hinting towards this, is that God is the one who determines the timing of all this. You know, we don't determine when we're going. I mean, for the most part, we don't determine when we're going to die. We don't determine when we're going to live. You know, and for these verses to sort of outline, there's a time, and live into them. You know, and I once heard someone say on this, you know, if there wasn't a time for sorrow, a time for death, we wouldn't have poetry and music in the world. And I thought that was very enlightening to think, you know, if we didn't have the bad times to be able to reflect on the good times, where would we be? And so this sort of outlines the times of life, whether they are good or whether they are bad.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. I think that's an interesting comment, because, you know, one of the things they say about like music and poetry is what you hear is just as important as what you don't hear. And like in poetry, what's in the space between the words, right? And so often when we think of time, when you think of music, you know, you're thinking of the beat and you're thinking about the next note that comes. But sometimes those rests and the space between the notes is just as important to making the piece what it is. Mm-hmm. I don't know about y'all, but I've always had a real interesting relationship, I think, with time. I'm sure people in our congregation have heard me preach before that I always felt a lot of pressure from my parents growing up to be successful. I was the first generation of women that could have it all. I could be the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. I could have a husband, 2.5 children, 2 dogs, a white house, and a white picket fence, right? Like I could do all that. So I really needed to use my time and my resources well to achieve all of those goals. And so I think I became very achievement oriented. So much so, I used to have the nickname Wonder Woman. And please don't call me that, because I now hate that nickname. But I was an incredible multitasker. And people used to say that I could do more in an hour than the average person. And so, for example, when I left the Greenville Symphony, they divided that position into 4 positions. I mean, that's insanity, right? When I left one of my first ministry positions, they divided that one into 2 positions. And I began to realize I was really just doing a disservice to the organization, right? Because sometimes organizations can't afford to hire on an extra person or whatever. And what I also found is when I was with my family, I was so distracted. I was always thinking about the work I needed to do. And like I would sit down to do homework with Andrew, and it was just stress-filled because I was stressed, right? And so homework would blow up. And that was really a lot less about Andrew and him not understanding, but my state of mind going into it. Because as we were talking about, I couldn't be present in that time. I was too focused on the future and what I was trying to achieve. And so at some point, I began to think about how I used my time. And I remember I was going to Church of the Redeemer in Greenville, and they were in stewardship season. And they were talking about time, talent, and treasure. And so I started thinking about what would it look like to tithe my time, right? What if 10% of my time was given to God and church, right? Well, that became really hard to do. Like 10% of a week, that's hard. And when I really wrestled with that, this like aha moment hit me. And I think it's what this author of Ecclesiastes is talking about, is really all time is God's time, right? Every single moment of which I'm living is a gift given by God. And how I live into that moment allows God to speak, to break in, for me to hear, for me to grow, for me to be transformed. So now I have a completely new understanding of time, and it affects how I live, how I move, how I be, my words, my actions. Not as much as I would always like, but I'm much more centered on how I live through my life now. What's y'all's relationship with time?
There doesn't ever seem to be enough of it. I think, ideally, and like most people, I would imagine I have some challenges, really living into this, but and people will give me grief because it's hard for me to do a Bible study and not refer to Genesis. But, God creates, in 7 days, and even God takes time off to rest and recreate. Recreation is to recreate and, or to recreate. And I think, that's just a lesson that's lost on most of us, is that it's really important to take time in a day, in a week, in a year, to step back from doing and remember, we're not human doers, we're human beings. And that can recenter us and refocus us. And it does help us understand that we are more than what we do or more than what we possess, that certainly we are made, and because we're made in God's image, resting is holy. It's sacramental. It's important. I think that's why it's one of the commandments. Observe the Sabbath. God understands that it's important for us to take time apart to nourish ourselves spiritually and just be and not do all the time. And that's just incredibly difficult when most of us live by our calendars or a to-do list. I've never heard of anybody that had a to-be list. Might be kind of an interesting concept. Even the idea of, creating a list to remind ourselves to be, that's so human. But the other side of that is, I think, trying to understand part of what you're referring to, Kelly, which is, how do we understand, if there's one day a Sabbath, how do we understand the other 6 to still be God's time? And that what occupies our efforts or our attention, when properly approached, that's also sacramental, because there's no time that's outside of God's time. And so the key to all this is, in a busy culture, is trying to figure out perhaps how do we recognize and share all the moments with God, and with each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find myself fighting time. I have a problem sitting in the stillness of time. I find myself hurrying up to wait. And Donald, who's our director of music and liturgy, likes to laugh and tease me that I have a sense of urgency, especially when it comes to planning funerals, which is what I do a lot of. And I want to hurry up and make sure that every single detail is planned and set up and ready to go. And he's like, calm down. This is going to happen, and it's going to happen well. But that's just me. I constantly battle time, and I don't work well unless I'm under pressure. If you were to say you've got 7 days to write a sermon and you have nothing to do in those 7 days, I wouldn't touch it until towards the end. Now, I might think about it, but I'm not going to sit and touch it. until, until I absolutely have to. And that's probably a lot of my, if y'all haven't figured out, I'm ADD. And that's just part of my ADDness, is that I don't work well unless I'm under pressure. So kind of being at Christ Church and being on part of our busyness helps me a lot. And I remember when I first came on, I was getting used to that. And Kelly would be like, how can I help you schedule your calendar? Because, I wasn't used to the business, but I've sort of found a rhythm of life in that. And I don't know if that's good or bad. There's probably both and to that. But time, it seems like, again, Wednesdays are 8 until 8 now, or sometimes a little bit earlier. But I have a love-hate relationship with time.
I think we all agree on that tonight, that we have this love-hate relationship with time. One thing I'm wondering from the people who are listening to us, as well as y'all, there's a lot of seasons listed here in Ecclesiastes. Like, I almost feel like I would love to just sit down and think about each of these times and when in my life have I been in these times. I'm curious, what time do you find yourself in right now?
Greta shared a word with us earlier, liminal, or liminality. Comes from the Latin word limen, I guess, or lemon, means threshold, any point or place of entering or beginning. A liminal space is the time between what was and what is next. It's a place of transition, waiting and not knowing. I think I would say a lot of people are in that spot right now during the pandemic.
Who shared that word?
Greta Parkinson.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things to talk about, are liminal spaces.
Yeah, it's a very popular seminary word.
Yeah, and you can have them.
I think one of the things about liminal spaces, and I think usually when people talk about liminal spaces, they have a profound sense of God's presence at that time. Mm-hmm. And I agree, we're in a liminal space right now, and I wonder how many people, though, actually feel God's presence at this moment. And if they would call that liminal.
Honestly, for me, I think a liminal space for me, and again, Harrison says that's a seminary word. Sometimes for me, worship is liminal. Like it brings us together. It's actually one of the few times that I can stop and not look at my watch. It's celebrating that which was. And of course, we have our eyes focused on what is to come, and we're doing it together as a community. And for me, that is, we go back to that word joy that we talked about a few weeks ago. And for me, that is joy. And that's a time where I can totally, the word I'm coming to mind is disengage. I'm not disengaged, but my wheels are stopped spinning. And I just allow myself to be in worship. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about our Episcopal worship, is that while the repetition is the same week after week, we're in this space with one another that continually is pointing us forward. And for me, that's where I use the liminal as a good word, and not, always wondering what's next outside of, worship or something like that.
That kind of, we've kind of come full circle, Charles, based on what you're talking about. It's that the importance of being present. Mm-hmm. A liminal moment is by definition in between other moments, and it forces you to be attentive to the here and now. Mm-hmm. And that's a good thing. And I would hope that your experience of worship perhaps maybe other people's experience of worship. And I think a large part of that is when we go to worship, when we've sort of committed to carve out that hour, we sort of let go of what's next. I'm going to be here, and I'm going to be here for an hour, and I don't have to worry about what's for lunch or what's coming next, or we can invest ourselves in an experience as a community, and be present to each other. That's a gift.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. So that whole comment completely derailed the question, what season do you find yourself in now? Is that a good avoidance? We moved it off so we don't have to talk about what season we find ourselves in right now.
Well, I can say because we're in this time of COVID stuff, the pandemic, my 2-week vacation was a staycation, and we did a lot of planting and plucking up in the yard, and I found that to be very relaxing. It certainly was, it was just physical labor, and my brain was sort of switched off, and it's a wonderful thing to be able to exercise a different part of your person, and go to bed sort of physically tired at night, not emotionally or spiritually or psychologically tired. So a time to plant and a time to pluck up when it's planted. What about you?
I was going to let Charles go next.
Well, I'm sitting here reading them, and like a lot of times in Scripture, they're especially the sage is showing the extremes. But I don't know that if I can say that I'm in any particular one. I'm sitting here rereading them again, and I sort of, again, I don't mean to always go to death, but it is a major part of what I do at Christ Church. It helping people go through that process of life. And it's in some of those times that, there's one that says a time to weep and a time to laugh. And I love it when a family can be in both of those, if that makes any sense. Like they're in the place of mourning of death, but they're also able to celebrate. So I'm not sure I'm in any particular one right now. I'm trying to see where I would place myself. So that's unanswered, Kelly.
Fair enough. I see that some of our people who are listening on Facebook are answering, because I see Jessica posting them into our chat box. So like Ann Arrington says she's in a time to heal. Sarah says she's in a time of dreaming what could be and what I could be and what we could be, which I think is interesting. I love that idea of season of dreaming. That's pretty cool. I think for me personally, I'm finding myself in a season of embrace. I told Harrison this the other day, but I'm just trying to embrace what God has in store for me. I'm one that tends to kind of dig in my heels and say no to things, instead of just accepting what God has in store. And so that's what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to embrace whatever's next and what's going on now.
Greta agrees with you, Kelly. She says a time to embrace, and then also says, but to refrain from embracing as well.
Yeah, I guess there's some things we probably don't want to embrace, right? And sometimes when you embrace something, that means that you're not embracing another, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it depends on whether you're a multitasker.
Which I am. Everybody.
How many things can you embrace at the same time? Yeah.
Yeah. You try to embrace it all at one time. So, which one would you say is the most difficult season for you?
Time to keep silence and a time to speak. They teach us in past CPE, sometimes just be a listener. Don't offer words, just listen. And that's it's one of the hardest things for me to do sometimes, is just to be that's another CPE word, that non-anxious presence, and just to listen rather than have the solution to the problem with my sense of urgency.
Harrison, what's your most difficult season?
I wonder if it's a time to kill and a time to heal. And when I guess I would put words in the writer's mouth, maybe a time to let die, as opposed to a time to kill. So often we just hold on to things that have gone beyond their useful purpose, but yet we just cling to it. And so I would sort of read that as a time to let go of things that may not be helpful or have outlived their purposefulness, or why do we have to hold on to everything? And so I would sort of impose my own meaning on that.
I think mine is a time for war. My natural conflict area is peacemaking. I don't like fighting. So, and I envision God as a God of peace who's trying to reconcile and not necessarily bring war, though we do have scripture that, says that. But I struggle with that one. I'm like, war? Why would we want war? We don't want war. So that one I think is always the hardest for me to live into. I'm kind of surprised maybe Harrison's not laughing at me right now, because there's a few times we've talked about stuff and I'm like, I'm coming to fight you on this issue. But I'm really not much of a fighter.
No,
I don't think.
No, that's not my experience of you.
Yeah. What's y'all's favorite season?
A time to keep silence and a time to speak. When we get off this this little session, as much as I enjoy the interaction and the camaraderie and the bantering, getting home and the silence is wonderful. Sitting on the back porch is wonderful.
I think I really enjoy time to weep and a time to laugh. I think there's a completeness to that. Sometimes laughter is everything that is good and positive for a soul, and it sort of validates the weeping, the mourning. It sort of makes that reality, again, like this person said to me several years ago, if without those times, we don't have anything like negative times, we won't have anything to mark the positive times. And so a time to, what is it? A time to weep and a time to laugh. I just think they both validate each other in some kind of way.
Well, as hard as that discussion was last week on Psalm 88, we did sort of acknowledge that, those lament psalms sort of identify the two sides of the same coin. You can't have crucifixion. You can't have resurrection without crucifixion. Can't have hope without despair. Can't have joy without sorrow. So I think you're making a good point, Charles.
Absolutely. I would say for mine is either silence or the laughing. I'm not naturally a funny person, but my husband is. And there's nothing that, and actually my son has a very strong wit too. I'm a very sarcastic wit. And I just love it when somebody just lays down a really good, funny line, like right at the right moment, because I'm not like that. And I love to just get a good laugh over something like that. So, Jessica, is there anything online that before we close up today, we need to address, or a question or anything?
No questions really, but people did share their favorite seasons: a time to laugh, a time to give up, baseball season, award season, and a time to laugh. And then we had a question, do you have to have both seasons? And you guys, I think, answered that, where, you can't have the resurrection without the crucifixion, and you can't enjoy the happy times without some of the sad times too. So I thought those were kind of neat. People shared their thoughts.
Well, thank you. We appreciate you moderating the Facebook part, Jessica, and we appreciate everybody's comments tonight and y'all sharing some of your different seasons of life. Any last words from any of y'all?
Ann Arrington says a time to dance. She wanted to get that in.
Tell Ann I'd love to dance with her sometime. I'm not a good dancer, but I like to dance. So, Harrison, would you close us in prayer tonight?
Sure. The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Almighty God, whose loving hands have given us all that we possess, grant us grace that we may honor you with our substance and remembering the account which we must one day give, may be faithful stewards of your bounty, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
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 All right.
Well, thank you, everyone. We hope you have a blessed week, and we'll see you next week on Clergy Klatch.
Great to be with y'all. Thanks so much.